Million workers are getting a pay rise today as the national minimum wage goes up by 20p an hour for workers over 21. The new adult rate is £6.70 an hour, while younger workers will get a smaller increase. The hourly rate for apprentices goes up by 57 pence to £3.30. It'll benefit 1.4 million people, but campaigners say it is still not enough to live on. A number of companies, including Costa Coffee, Morrisons and Lidl, have already said that they will pay their staff a higher living wage. Well, we've got a group of people from across the UK to join us, all affected by the minimum wage. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. Ryan Aldred in Plymouth, you work in retail on the minimum wage. Tell us first of all what difference the 20p increase will make for you.
Not a great deal, to be perfectly honest. I'm working on effectively a 0-hour contract, so it's not really going to make much difference to me because I'm not getting the hours anyway. So I welcome the change, but it's not brilliant.
Phil Waltham in Hull, you own a restaurant in Hull. What impact will the increase have on your business?
Well, we still have the same amount of targets, we still have the same amount of staff. It will have a huge impact. Basically, we have 10 members of staff, so 10 members of staff, it spreads right across. It makes our profit margins come right down. So, yeah, it does have a big impact, yeah.
Vanessa Callan, you own a nursery near Stansted and you currently pay the minimum wage. Will you be able to afford to pay the extra?
To be honest, we tend to pay the minimum wage for a few staff, certainly not all of them, but it's the apprentices it's going to hit. We currently like to train our staff from scratch and take on as many apprentices as we can. We're an outstanding nursery and we believe that the training we offer here is better actually than the colleges. Now that's something that's really going to be affected because taking on apprentices obviously at such a higher rate is going to really affect the profit margins. But also sort of overall we do tend to like to have surplus staff, which is something that would be a luxury as the wages go up. So it is going to affect us. Unfortunately, we're actually going to have to put the fees up for parents, which is something that's going to affect, obviously, if this does affect every nursery, which I'm sure it will do, it's going to affect the entire country and obviously childcare costs for people.
John Mills, you're a large employer, you're the boss of JML. What do you think about it?
Well, I think the history of minimum wages is that on the whole, the fears that a lot of people have had that they're going to add to inflation and reduce employment have turned out to be wrong. On the whole, they've had a beneficial effect on people's living standards. Obviously, if you put them up too high, that you do start running into the sort of problems which you've heard some of our earlier speakers talking about. But on balance, I think having some reasonable minimum wage level and stepping it up gradually as the government proposes does make a lot of sense.
William Jarrett in Newcastle, I know that you're a council catering worker. You earn just above the minimum wage. How hard is it to live on an income at that level?
Good morning, thanks for having me. It's extraordinarily difficult. Many of us are working second jobs, most of which are very low paid. I'm on effectively a 0 hours contract in the public sector. I appreciate what another guest is saying about having a small business, but particularly what we're most interested in as members of the National Shop Stewards Network, we're asking for £10 an hour, and we need this as the basis to eliminate poverty pay, which is an epidemic. People are reliant on tax credits, which the Tories have very helpfully reduced by £4.4 billion. 5 million children will be left without £750 per annum in additional household income. These are the most very vulnerable of our community, and of course now David Cameron is still telling porkies, if you'll forgive the phrase, about what this means for our economy, offering a derisory and insulting £8 by 2020.
Well, you've heard from the business owners who say that it really is tough for them. They're creating jobs. What would you say to Phil or Vanessa, who say it is very difficult for them to pay these sorts of wages?
I appreciate that they're in a particular predicament whereby they're small businesses, and of course there will have to be certain concessions and considerations made for those people. However, the largest public sector and private sector employers must in unison now begin to pay a living wage, and that doesn't mean £7.85 or £9.50 waiting in London. That means £10 universally across the board, across the country, because people are suffering. We're subsidising big business with tax credits to an unbelievable tune. The Conservatives are robbing with the left hand after they give with the right, and this is simply not a sustainable solution, especially when children are suffering.
Jason Choi, you pay more than you have to because you're a chief executive of a company employing 22 people and you pay all your staff above the national living wage. Why did you decide to do that?
So for us as a business, we need to attract great talent, and there is fantastic young talent out there actually, and we felt that by doing that, it provides us with a great return on investment, not only for loyalty, but for certainly for staff retention. They offer a greater service to our clients, and I guess from there it's a success circle really. So we invest more in them, they provide better service. That service means that we attract a bit more clients and we can employ more people. So that strategy for us is working.
And Kahim Mackenzie, you're in that position in that you have an employer who's decided to do the same. Does that make you feel more valued and happier in the workplace?
Of course, looking at staff, the staff does feel valued. It makes them less worried and highly motivated to come into work. Same as Jason was explaining, my current employer employ 25 people and we're all on London living wage.
Anna Sofia Ferreira, you were on the minimum wage. You've now gone to a new job which pays you more than that.
Yes, I'm now a care support worker for Penrose Care. They are actually one of the 4 agencies accredited by care agency accredited by the London Living Wage Foundation. And yes, I can say that there is a difference between being in the London living wage and the minimum wage. I can feel it because before I was renting just a room in a flat share, and now I can rent my own flat. I don't feel so stressed about my bills and any expenses that I need to have. And I actually have more time for myself because I don't need to be spending the whole day working or working extra hours to have my extra money for myself. And by this, I feel like it's gonna result in better care towards Penrose's clients, and I feel like Penrose is actually valuing their employees.
Ryan, do you believe employers have a responsibility to their employees to ensure that they can afford the cost of living?
Absolutely, and I think it benefits those businesses to provide higher wages simply because obviously with higher wages people have more money in their pockets and then they can obviously use that for those businesses. That's why I've also been campaigning for Youth Fight for Jobs and the Socialist Party for a £10 an hour minimum wage because, as I said, it's just not sustainable, and financially you face day-to-day insecurity over whether you're going to be able to make your rent and pay for food and bills every month. So I think employers do have to try and step up. I think there should be concessions that the government should give for sort of smaller businesses that might struggle on their own without sort of getting subsidies to help pay for a living wage.
Jason and John, someone has to pay in the end, don't they? Does it end up being the consumer having to pay higher costs?
I think it probably does finish up, yes, with the consumer paying higher costs. And I think there's another important factor, which is really if you're going to get living standards up, you have to have more investment in this country, you have to have more growth. Really, to some extent, what happens if you have minimum wages, you move the problems around from one place to another. But that's not an argument against having a minimum wage, but it won't solve all the problems of living standards.
But at the same time, I'm guessing that if we increase wages, that's more money in the economy as well. So that's got to be a plus. But the point I also wanted to make was that the government also promised corporations tax relief to offset some of that minimum wage, and that it would be something that certainly small medium businesses would like to see come into effect a lot quicker. Obviously, the minimum wage increases today. There is no actual date as to when the corporations tax relief will come into effect, but it'd be great if we can get the government to.
Could I just say something?
Yeah, sure, Vanessa.
About the childcare industry, the government give parents 15 hours free funded childcare per week. The government will only give us a set amount. So at the moment it's £4.01 per hour for each child. We're not allowed to charge the parents any more, and the parents have the right to bring the children in and not expect any extra costs. Now they're wanting to increase this to 30 hours. Again, they will set the funding. So they're setting the funding without actually properly having a consultation with the business owners about how much it actually costs. Now, as the national minimum wage goes up and pension contributions are coming in as well, we're suddenly in a situation where we are being dictated to by the government for how much we can actually charge for our service. And we're not actually able to make up the difference.
But what about the companies that don't actually get help from the government? The companies that actually have to stand on their own 2 feet, like bars and restaurants.
That money is actually the parents are giving that money. We're not giving that money.
This is a divide and conquer tactic.
I would say out of all the industries, it's probably the one that's going to be one of the most affected by this rise.
This is very much a divide and conquer tactic. What's deliberately being crafted here by this Conservative government is a sort of debate and a discussion that's geared towards small businesses, pitting these small businesses against average ordinary workers. And this isn't the discussion we need to be having. In Redcar in Cleveland, just down the road from here, 1,700 people are going to lose their positions, skilled workers who will now receive, if they're fortunate at all, job seekers allowance or a very, very low paid job with very limited hours and 0 hours contracts. This is an absolute scandal and a disaster. They have given money to Abramovich to the tune of something like $45 billion to bail out his own steel company. Meanwhile, someone like me has to survive on 2 jobs, and you got MPs who've just received a 10% pay rise. This is unacceptable and it is scandalous.
Next year, the wage will go up further. The national living wage will come into effect in April, and it'll go up to £7.20.
Yeah, and £7.20 doesn't hold a lot of buying power, unfortunately. Levels of inflation, the price of heating and energy use, the prices of food are skyrocketing. They're astronomical.
But £7.20 an hour can actually cripple other companies. It can cripple small businesses, small entrepreneurs, and then it puts them out of business. So say, for example, if that actually introduced, or it does get introduced, the other gentleman was going on about £10 an hour. Now, if £10 an hour came into play, then it'd actually rip the heart out of our business. It'd actually put 10 of my employees and myself out of business.
So what are you going to do, Phil? What will you do? Will you put up your prices in your restaurant? Will you lay off staff? How will you manage?
Well, it's difficult in the area that we actually are because people have got little money and there's a lot of bars and restaurants around me. So we're still having to compete, so which means that we still have to keep low prices. So how do we get low prices but then having to increase up to something like £10 an hour?
Well,
it's ridiculous.
This is a very simple matter of economics. This is a simple matter of economics. When you pay people £10 per hour, there is going to be a lot more expendable and disposable income to spend in communities, and including on small businesses.
You come to Hull and talk about economics to me, mate.
I want to bring in the studio John Mills and Jason again, because you have bigger businesses. £10 an hour. What would you think about that?
Well, the business, JML pays well above the minimum wage because we're a high productivity company, but we're in a different part of the world than a lot of other organisations which have a lot more difficulties. I mean, I think that in the end is a bit of a trade-off. If you put the minimum wage up sufficiently, then there will be less work around. But I think we should try and push the minimum wage up as much as we can before we start running into these constraints, because there is a real problem of people struggling on very low wages in this country.
I would just like to add, if I may, the movement for $15 an hour in America, which is actually being led by a socialist councillor in Seattle called Shama Sawan, has gone viral. This has spread across the United States to every major city and even small towns. Employment is on the increase. Companies are having to slightly reduce their profits. Executives are receiving slightly lower pay, and people are benefiting and spending the tangible assets that they have in this new set of disposable income in their communities. This is bolstering employment. We need to invest to spur growth, and that's being prevented and prohibited by this government, which is nothing but a crony, corporate Conservative government.
Just bring in some points of view from the audience. We're getting lots of comments on this one. If you're moaning about paying your staff £6.80 an hour, you don't deserve to run a business, pay a living wage or shut down. Alan has emailed to say if the new minimum wage is the lowest amount people need to live on, why is the state pension set at the same level, or are the government trying to kill off pensioners by starving them? And Peter has emailed to say the minimum wage should be universal, not age-related. All voters should be treated equally. Government legislation should not be allowed to break its own ageism laws. Any company that cannot pay the minimum wage should not be in business. I doubt any business owner is on the minimum wage. Just before I let you all go, just wanted to ask you a couple of comments, John Mills, about the Labour Party, because you've been a very generous donor to the Labour Party over the years, and we were talking there about £10 an hour minimum wage. That's a policy Jeremy Corbyn has talked about. Have you decided that you will definitely stop giving to the Labour Party now Jeremy Corbyn is in charge?
No, I certainly haven't. There were some suggestions in the papers that was the case, but no, I thought of going on supporting the Labour Party, just as I always have done.
In the same way, directly into central coffers, not supporting separate groups?
Yes, yes.
Have you become convinced by Jeremy Corbyn in a way that you weren't?
Well, I've never agreed with everything that Jeremy Corbyn had to say, but I think some of the things he said, particularly about austerity, are right. And the Labour Party's always been a mixture of different sorts of people, different wings in the party, and I think there's quite a fruitful debate going on at the moment about where the Labour Party goes, and I'd like to be involved in that as much as I can.
So you will carry on?
Yes.
Giving money?
Yes.
Has he convinced you then over time? Because there were obviously reports that you seem to be feeling somewhat differently towards him.
Well, there was a very inaccurate report in a couple of the papers which was corrected on the social media. No, it's not true that I'm withdrawing support. I'm quite happy to continue as I am.
So you're fully behind him then? You wouldn't be supporting a group of MPs within the party who want to promote a different perspective from the one that he has?
No, I'm not involved in any campaigns to oust Jeremy Corbyn or anything like that. I do think there's a very important debate going on in the Labour Party now about what its future is going to be, what it's going to offer the electorate in 2020. And I think we need some sort of synthesis between the traditional parties, the more moderate wing of the Labour Party's had, and the new approach that Jeremy Corbyn has put forward. And I'm reasonably optimistic that that will materialise before we get to the next general election.
Under him?
Yes, well, I think it's very likely that Jeremy Corbyn will still be there in 2020.
Thank you very much, John Mills, and thank you very much to all of the rest of my guests for coming in and talking to us about the minimum wage increase that's come in today. And do keep your thoughts coming in.